Well, I'm excited to introduce you all to my dear friend, Brian Calley, President and CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan, former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Michigan, having run statewide races, now in the position as the chief advocator in the state of Michigan on behalf of small businesses, more than 30,000 members, represented in every part of 83 counties in the state. It's an honor to sit with you, to ask you a few questions, and to gain your insight on a topic I think that you are an expert in, which is relationship building. And we want to have kind of a curiosity conversation today about how you relationship build, the process for how you go develop relationships with people, how you attend events. There's a science to that. And I guess we'll just start with my favorite question of all time, with what's new and exciting in the world of Brian Calley?
There's so much that is happening, as I go through this journey of life, and my kids went from little kids to now one in college, and professionally, now 4 years into a brand new career. It's like, what hasn't changed? What's not exciting? I mean, it's really a dynamic time. Professionally, this has just been a blast, to wake up every day and to go and do work that I love to do and believe in, and with people that are talented and exciting and dynamic and just doers, people that like to make things happen. It's a lot of fun. But there's also the business behind, the association itself is 53 years old, and it's constantly having to reinvent itself. And we find ourselves in that position today. Associations worked a certain way before the pandemic. We changed everything during the pandemic. Now we're post-pandemic period, and the way that the business world operates, the way that people interact with each other has changed so much that it's caused us to reflect on how, where, why we do certain things. And it's a time of reinvention or renewal in the association. So we've grown a lot, 30,000 members, largest in America. Largest state-based small business association in the whole country, which is pretty awesome. But, either you're growing or you're falling behind. And so we're in that growth mindset. Like 30,000 is a lot. It's number one, but it's not enough.
It's not enough. And the work you do is similar to the previous role as Lieutenant Governor. It's nonstop. You're always in advocacy mode, helping people. I'm curious to know, how are you able to establish relationships that last a decade or that will last for the next 20 years with people? I mean, you started out as a state representative out of Portland, Michigan, small town by anyone's measure, and yet you still have a lot of people in your world that come from your initial time in state office, and now they've transitioned in a part of your world today. So how do you cultivate and develop relationships with people that will last a lifetime?
It's really about knowing people or what makes them tick. It's a change in mindset about, like, the old sales mentality of what can I get out of this relationship to what can I give, what can I put into this relationship of value. And I like being very, very direct on this. I mean, you've got to be careful sometimes, especially if you're just meeting somebody and you really want to get to know them, you're impressed with them, and you love the work that they do, and you just want to start a new relationship there. To just try to make that connection to know them, and not even with business, what makes them tick, what are they excited about, what drives them every day to go out there and perform and build what they've done. I found that people really like to talk about themselves, and giving them an opportunity to talk about themselves is a winning strategy almost every time. Mm-hmm. But if you're really listening, then you can find ways to connect and relate. And I think that's where the real magic happens. And then remembering those nuggets and kind of following up on that. What you're sending a message that I heard you, I listened, but I also care enough to have followed up. This did not start naturally for me, though. I used to take notes. I had these when I was first getting involved in politics. I was in banking, and I had a certain way of dealing with things in banking, but that was a relatively small pool of people that I was dealing with compared to when you run for public office. And I remember I used to have this notebook this lined note paper like you would bring into a college class or something. And I would date it at the top of every page, and every person I met that day, what we talked about, and just any little
Oh, my
nugget
goodness.
of information, I would just write down on there. And then the next time that I was going to a place and think, okay, last time I was in this town or at this event or with this organization, when was that? Okay, look up in my notes. Oh yeah, I talked to that guy, and I remember his his father was having surgery. So I'm going to ask him how that turned out. And so as I go through, and I gained a reputation like I had this incredible memory, but really I didn't. What I had was a system, and I used to be embarrassed to tell people about that because I thought, oh, it'll seem contrived or as though it's somehow fake because I have a system and I intentionally did it. But I'm totally 180 on that now. What that means is that I care. So I think, what if somebody else did this? They met with me and they cared so much about getting to know me that they took notes so that the next time they talked with me, that they could make sure that they were speaking into things that I cared about. That would tell me this person cares about their relationship with me. So anyway, that's how I got started. And looking back, it was there was a CEO of this very small bank I used to work for, and he was one of these guys who just could remember everybody's name. And my wife and I, we didn't have kids yet, but we had 2 ferrets, and their names were Sadie and Ringo. And what always impressed me was that the CEO of the bank that I worked for always remembered the names of the ferrets.
Right.
And how's Sadie and Ringo doing? And the thing is, now I look back and think, I always thought he just had one of these incredible memories. Maybe he did.
He had a system, probably.
Or more likely, he probably had a system. And so I look back like, yeah, it's just so powerful. I remember as a young professional, like, wow, here's this person, the CEO of the bank that I work for. I'm, 5 levels away in terms of my position. I don't work directly with the CEO. And yet, he knows me so well that he knows the names of my pets. That's powerful stuff.
It made you feel special in that moment, right? It's like, how could you remember the name of the pets? But that's what it takes.
Right.
So I want to follow up on a couple of points that you brought up. First, I'd love to know if you have a short list of questions that you prepare in advance when you walk into a room blind, or when you walk into a room full of executives that you don't know. Do you have a few that you've kind of rehearsed or prepared that you find are the most useful or that help you elicit conversations that go in a good direction? Do you have a couple questions you might share with us?
I don't have go-to questions per se, but I do try to avoid the cliche type of questions. I hate the "how are you doing" one because people feel an obligation to say how they're doing, but I'm
great.
Yeah, I'm great. They feel like to make sure that everybody thinks that it's great because in social media world, you have to look like everything's awesome. And so I take 2 kind of, I'll get to your question, but before I do, I've taken 2 different approaches to when I'm asked one of those cliche questions.
Okay.
How are you doing? And I like to either go one direction or my answer is super fantastic. And get somebody's reaction to that, like, "Whoa, that's not what I was expecting."
Sure.
What makes it so super fantastic? And I got that from a mutual friend of ours, actually, a guy who was used to be the head of Bell Tire.
Okay.
And that was the way he answered it. It made such an impression on me. Is "Hey Bob, how are you doing? Super fantastic." And I was like, "Oh, I just love that." But then the other way is to give a real answer. And here's what I've found is that people do not expect a real answer to that question.
Sure.
Because there are things that are a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that in my life that are discouraging, that are obstacles to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm in the middle of one of those and somebody asks me a question like that, I might just give you the real answer.
You give it to them real straight.
And it's now sometimes that you can tell whether or not you're talking to a friend, because when you give a real answer to a question like that, the reaction is either one of, like, now you're inconveniencing me.
Yeah, sure.
Like,
you got to pause and listen and hear about
trying to be polite and move on
sure.
here. But then you can also find people that, do deeply care and sometimes can relate and have some insight or some advice, some help, or even just, the ability to give that understanding. Like, okay, there's one more person in the world that understands this struggle that I'm having right now because they just listened to me.
So you kind of give them an opportunity to display some empathy, which you talked about earlier, as you ask questions and you listen with intent to care and pay attention. That's an important component to it. I find that sometimes when people ask me that question, I'll just hit them straight with, I'm healthy and I'm doing well. And people are like, oh, I'm like, everything else is a bonus. And that kind of hits people in a different way because those questions are a little bit robotic for people. So I'm glad to hear that you have the super fantastic one is a good one. I've also heard people say something like, I'm at about an 8 and I could be a 10 if.
Right.
And so they've given them a window to see if they can move in and help solve that, the 2-point spread that they need to get better.
Yeah, that's the idea of giving somebody an opportunity to provide value is a powerful thing. I mean, I love it when people ask me for favors, and it's not because it's not a Godfather thing. Like someday I might need something in return, but it's a matter of it makes me feel useful,
right?
And if I like feeling useful, I imagine other people like feeling useful. So I like to invite, I know a lot of people, I've done a lot of things, and there have been people in my life right along the way that have been, I could go to if I have an issue or a challenge, no matter what it is, just, hey, I've got this and I've got this challenge in front of me. I'm not exactly sure where to go or where to even start, or I've hit a bunch of dead ends. Any ideas for me, people that I could reach out to? And I've got those kind of go-to people, and they've made such a big deal in my life that like I aspire to be that for somebody else. And so I love it when people ask for favors, like, hey, could you make this introduction? Or I'm having this problem here. Can you put in a word, or can you like that, or reference letters sometimes, and just different things. I bend out unless I really, really don't believe it. If somebody asks me like on LinkedIn, hey, can you write me a recommendation for my profile? Like, unless I really don't know that person at all, I'm going to try to take whatever I do know that's positive and to share it to provide or add value. And that's it's by giving other people that opportunity to be of value to you, it creates a bond. Now they have some like ownership in your success. And having more people have ownership in your success is it's powerful. It's something that withstands the kind of transactional nature of the old way of doing business, where are you of utility of me right now, and what have you done for me lately, type of a thing. There's actually a phrase that and I give away some of my secrets here, but I do it only because to me, they're, please understand, these are sincere, even though they're pre-contemplated. But I like to tell people who are important to me when they ask me for something, or ask me for some help on something, that when I say yes, like, and, regardless, you might be surprised or, so thankful or whatever. Listen, this is important to me because it's important to you.
Right.
And there's nothing else is required. There's not a thing where it's like, but it's got to add value to no, it's important to me simply because it's important to you.
They called you during a time of need and you want to show up and be helpful.
And that is I feel like I get more, it's when people are so thankful, I feel guilty a little bit about it because I feel like I get more satisfaction out of it than maybe even they do.
Let's talk about the people. You're not using a notepad to maintain your database these days. Have you developed an intuitive system today that kind of transitioned from the notepad and pen and the people that you've met locally? We're talking statewide. You travel the country advocating on behalf of small business. So your Rolodex is probably very powerful these days. And there's got to be an intuitive way to arrange it. Can you give us some ideas without giving the industry trade secrets? But how do you manage the relationships?
I actually still keep lists. I just do it electronically now. And it's not as detailed as before, and I've gotten to know people, and I'm sometimes surprised at just how much data the human brain can store if you're thinking about it. And so I don't have to necessarily keep all the little details, and it's, believe me, I run into a lot of people that know me that I don't remember.
Of course.
But I still have a literal to-do list that I keep just in the notes section on my iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
And when I have an interaction and there's just something about that interaction I want to retain, there's something about typing it out and keeping it there. And it might not require any particular follow-up. It's just something that I just don't want to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
And it may or may not come up in the future. So I do keep a literal list. It's a pretty long list now. But I go through it from time to time to just jog my memory about things that I otherwise may have forgotten.
From time to time, do you set a calendar invite in your phone, reminder to go through notes? I mean, give me a little bit more on the strategy there.
Sure. Well, it's I live on my phone,
Mm-hmm.
so it's probably to an extent that maybe isn't totally healthy. Put it down every once in a while, but multiple times a week. I mean, it's just kind of going over. I just don't want to forget an important interaction, is there a follow-up? Or maybe there was something I wasn't sure if there was a follow-up required. I just want to think about that a little bit more and see if was there something I could do to add value to this situation, or here's because it's not always people either. Sometimes it's situations. But just a literal list that's constantly growing. But I like to keep old things on it too. So just so I can remember, it's not a record that probably matters to anybody else except for me, but there are so many like interesting and cool things that I just forget about.
It's impossible to remember it all.
And just a few words here and there, if I had like, I've never been one for resolutions, but if I had a resolution that I'd really like to make, and I did for about a year when I was running for governor, I kept a journal, and almost every day I wrote in that journal, not what happened that day, but just kind of like what that day was like. They had days when you're on the top of the mountain and days when you're at the bottom of the valley, and days when you feel like you're just hitting on all cylinders, and days when just felt like it was all falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept that, and it's cherished.
Mm-hmm.
I kept a journal when my son was in intensive care when he was born prematurely. He was in intensive care for a month. And I have a 30-day journal from the time that he was in the hospital, from when the day he was born all the way through to the day we brought him home. And that is one of my most cherished items. And it's not because of any particular page or any particular bit of wisdom from it, but it was an important formative time in my life, and I don't want to forget it. And there's so many of these little details that have it not been for that record, life moves on.
It's fast.
And I would have forgotten so much of it. So those big things, I've done journaling for big things in my life, but I wonder though how treasured it would be if I did it when it wasn't a big thing that was happening.
Yeah, the process of that is very helpful, especially to remember and look back, which sometimes it's important to do that as you move into these new roles and new opportunities present themselves. I remember a quote that you said to me during the campaign is, sometimes we're going to have good days, sometimes we're going to have bad days, sometimes it's going to be a little bit of both, but as long as we're moving the ball forward every day, and we're closing strong, that's what's most important.
It's really, with anything in life, but especially hard things, consistency is what usually will get you there. In politics, at the end of the day, there's a lot of factors on whether you win. I won most of my elections. I didn't win the last one. I was saying, politics, there's only three potential outcomes. Either you quit, stop running, or you lose, or you become president of the United States. Like, those are the only three options, right? And you kind of move on. But, won most of the races, lost that last one. And but the thing is, my experience in all of those wins and one loss was that being able to still perform even on the horrible days is important. Like the idea of not to let the bad days stop you from having good days. because it can be very self-defeating. And business is the same way. Like, you have days when it's just clicking and you just hit a home run, and other times when you might work twice as hard, but it's just not coming together. And that is it can be discouraging, but consistency over a long period of time is what wins off. That perseverance of being able to stomach the bad days and not let it affect the work ethic that produces the good days.
I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the experiences on the campaign trail, not too deep, but there's some experiences that we had on the trail that you're still utilizing today in terms of relationship development. Sometimes you'd be in front of a billionaire or people that are managing companies, founders, CEOs that, 10,000 people or whatnot, very successful, highly driven, highly motivated people. And you get 15 minutes or you get your 2 minutes, whether it's a call or an in-person meeting, or maybe you get a full hour. Can you talk about the preparation that it takes in order to have the confidence to sit across from someone that this person has a high capacity and they can help me achieve my overall goal? How do you prepare for those types of meetings?
It's not particularly complicated, but I'm amazed at how many people don't do it. So people put their lives out there, both personally and professionally. There's a record of so much that's happening. And so the idea of just taking the time to look at, okay, so this is a person who's running this company. What is that company up to? What are they known for? What are they good at? And maybe they just launched something. And just a simple question in the beginning. Hey, I just saw that you launched this new line or this innovation to an old line. How did that go? Or how is that going? Or how did that come about? There are so many different questions you can ask, and it almost doesn't matter what the question is. What matters is you're sending a message that you know them, or the value that they're creating, the work that they're doing, and giving them an opportunity to kind of lay it down. So I think that prep work that you do in the beginning. Now, if you know something in particular that you line up well on, I'm a runner. I'll be running the Indianapolis Marathon in about a month. If I were meeting with somebody and I happen to know they were a marathon runner, I just know marathon runners love to talk to other marathon runners. We're obsessed with it. We just can't stop talking about it. And so it's just a really nice way to, especially if you've got, if it's a 2-minute meeting, you can't, and you've got some sort of an objective, you can't necessarily get into the personal stuff. But if you've got a nice sit down, you're breaking bread together, you've got an extended period of time, if there is something that that can open up in a warm way, and I've seen people, just want to get right down to business, and I can respect that. It's like, I've been trying to get on with this person, I got to get down to business with them. You know what I love though is if you've got a conversation and it's flowing well and it has nothing to do with the topic that you were planning on talking to, but you're really connecting. Don't break that. I mean, just let it keep on going. I am a big, big fan of the Columbo message. I know Columbo is kind of a dated reference, but he's like this detective in a TV show, and he would go in and have an interaction with somebody, and then he would be done. And he'd always one more thing. And the one more thing was really what he was. The
business of it.
That was the main thing that he was trying to get at the whole time. And all the other stuff was just, was just kind of foreplay, if you will. And so I love the idea of letting, you let your whole time get used up on this great kind of personal interaction that you have going. And it's like, I want to respect your time. I know that you've, and we basically run out of time here. I did want to talk to you about this, and this is a really cool thing. Could we either you've got enough time to do a quick kind of rundown of whatever that topic is, or you ask for a follow-up, and if the meeting went like you thought it did, and it was just a great, now you're becoming friends, and the idea of a follow-up is not just business. So the idea of, hey, there was one more thing I wanted to talk to you about, or the idea of trying to set yourself up for the next interaction. Actually, setting yourself up for the next interaction is important no matter what. But the idea of letting a good connection go, even if it's not subject matter that you are expecting, it's powerful, because again, it's like relationships. I mean, who is it that you have that can influence you? Well, it's the people that you have strong relationships with. And if you want to be that for somebody else, you've got to be able to have the patience to put in the time to build it on something that's stronger than a transaction. Now there'll be people. Sometimes you reach these kind of driven, high level people, and all they want to talk about is business. But you need to know that too, because that person feel like you're trying to make some personal connection.
They don't want to hear it.
Yeah, you're wasting their time.
Sure.
So you have to have enough intel going into the meeting to know, okay, is this a no nonsense? They don't want a friendship with me.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to start with the transaction. You have to figure out the friendship part of it later on. That's okay too. I don't personally like those relationships very, very much. I mean, I think they have a smaller chance of lasting 10 years than those where you can establish that close relationship. So you got to know something about the people, but their lives are out there. But then also asking other people, like other people that know, when you're connected with somebody, hey, I've got this meeting and I think that you know each other. Anything I ought to know about how the approach that I should take here? Again, you're giving that person a chance to give you an easy favor, a little bit of insight, and then you're going in with more intel. One thing that I think can be a big mistake people use, though, is you have to be careful with name dropping. So, like, let's say I think these two people are good friends, and I'm meeting with one of them, and I drop the name of this other person. Everybody thinks that everybody else likes them, but sometimes, dare I say, a lot of the time, people don't like each other as much as you think.
Right.
And so sometimes dropping that name hurts you more than it helps you. So unless you really, really know, I've even run into this with families before.
Absolutely.
Where I think, because I know and I'm good with this family member, I'm going to drop that name over here, and I find out that they hate each other.
Yeah, they might label you in a box.
Yes.
Don't let this guy in.
Yeah.
Right?
So in that case, I get the idea, the wanting to like borrow somebody else's credibility for a shortcut.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be some circumstances where somebody else's credibility is important, but you should be really, really sure that name, that kind of reference, that credibility borrow is accomplishing what you think, because it doesn't always.
Yeah, I know for a fact, people come to us a lot for these types of introductions. Oh, hey, I know you know this person at this company. The old adage is what you know is important, but whom you know gives you that instant credibility. So like, I could just go to Brian or Derek and they'll send an email introduction. And I'm like, this is basically just a sales intro. You could do this on your own. But people sometimes look for that easy way out, thinking that the name is going to help leverage them. And I'm like, they're just straightforward people. You can go right directly to them.
Yeah.
But sometimes people need that little support. And depending on our interest, we may give it to them.
Yeah. And there's warm introductions and handoffs, they can be, that is a good way. It's more about like the idea of there's no shortcut really, though, to building your own credibility. And that's where I think the name dropping sometimes can be, people are just trying to take too much of a shortcut and not doing the work themselves to establish their own credibility. And borrowing somebody else's might get you in the door. But once you're in there, you're on your own. I mean, you've got to build it yourself. And if it's based on just a transaction, I'm the lowest cost provider. Well, you're good until there's a lower cost provider. And but if it's based on something, on real value, what's the value of this relationship, the value of this transaction, the value of the business that we're doing together, and the relationship that we have, then it's more likely to be one of these relationships that can last your whole career.
How have you been able to leverage your time in at events? So SBAM is 83. You're covered in 83 counties. You got members all over the state. You're in DC. You travel the country. Just showing up at an event and having presence is not enough for people like us, and especially in your position. You got a limited window. You got a family of 3. I know you like to get home and spend time with them. You like to run. You have your own things that you like to do. So how do you, when you have an important event on your calendar, whether it's a conference, either for the association or external, how do you maximize your time in?
I learned, actually, there's one interaction that sticks in my mind the very first time I ran for a state office that has informed the way that I interact with people more broadly. I was knocking on doors running for state representative in 2006. The economy in Michigan was really bad, about to get a lot worse, but it was really bad, and the budget was in trouble. And so anyway, a person asked me, or when I went to the door and, I'm running for state representative, and he asked me, what are you going to do to balance the budget and make sure that schools are taken care of? And I just answered back with a question. It's really important. I'd love to give your insight, though, about why that's important and what and what you see as some of the solutions are. And he went on, I don't even know how long, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, giving me all the stuff and talked about a whole bunch of issues. And we got done. He's holding my pamphlet in his hands, which he hadn't really looked at. And at that point, he looked down, he tapped it on his hand a few times. He goes, I like the way you think. Now, he did not know anything about how I thought. All he knew was that I knew what he thought, because he just told me and I listened. And it was a really powerful connection. I walked out of there with a sign location in a yard and a person that came to the door kind of aggressive, and like the idea of just listening and how powerful that was. I love to ask people about their business, even just what it is, what their business is, and how as a new person, what's your business? How long have you owned it? And there's a story behind it. It's their baby. I read a paper one time there's like, some kind of brain scan or whatever of people who own businesses and what parts of their brain were activated when they were talking about their business. And it was the same part of the brain, and the mapping of it looked the same as when parents talk about their kids. I mean, that's like there's that much of an emotional connection with this thing that a business owner created. And so to just ask, how'd you get into that? Like it's a powerful story. For them, they built their whole life around this story. It's the theme of their life in most cases. And it's exciting, especially to them. And by understanding it, you're making that emotional connection. And so I do more listening than talking. Usually there's a program. I'll do my talking when it's the program and I'm, just introducing people and saying hi and giving a little policy update. I'll have that. I don't need every interaction for me to be kind of speaking into it, but I'm trying to receive as much as I can. And that's something that, those who have created something out of nothing, created a business out of nothing, have such like an emotional connection to that it's their favorite thing. And now I'm interested in that. It's natural because that's my professional life anyway, to be of value and of use to create an environment for the our motto is real simple, or our purpose of our organization is real simple: the success of Michigan small business. And knowing the stories is an important part of being able to serve.
So you're asking engaging questions, giving them an opportunity to share with you. And I can imagine some people do not stop talking and want to take you down a path, and you might, oh my God, it's been 10 minutes in this conversation. I haven't said a word, and they continue. Do you have any advice for how to manage some of those conversations as you're at some of these events? You can't spend an hour with every person. I have found something called the graceful exit is very helpful, but in your travels, statewide office leader, lieutenant governor, and now 30,000 members, how do you navigate through some of these events?
I rather than ending an interaction with a person, I like to insert a new dynamic into this discussion, and that's to pull somebody else in and give them a chance. Now the focal point is somebody else, and it might be the same type of a question, and now they have an audience of two to listen to listen to it, and so it's a more kind of inclusive approach where. Maybe the person that I started with is interested enough to stick around and hear somebody else's story, or maybe not. But it's a way to kind of spread the love without having to cut somebody off, and that is obviously very passionate about the thing that they're talking about. We deal in politics sometimes, and sometimes, even though a lot of small business owners are well aligned on politics, there can be some times when it just gets off into a part of the political scene that I'm not into, or we're not into, non-business issues, or too much negativity and kind of a destructive approach.
Typical conversation in politics.
Yeah, I mean, these days it can get there. Sure. And that's where I find that's most important is, I want the interactions to be positive and hopeful. And so I do find that it's necessary sometimes to help people see opportunity and activism and engagement as an outlet for their frustration, as opposed to just anger. And that's where sometimes you can take, a conversation that might be heading down a direction where it's like, ooh, it's kind of bringing down the room and the mood in the room, where we're trying to, we want people to really connect and be hopeful and positive, and turn it into an engagement, a way of engaging, saying, let me show you this door. You're frustrated. I'm frustrated too. Let's walk through this door together here and engage in a way that makes a difference. Like right now, we can make a point, but making a point is not the same as changing something out there. And so any one of us on our own can't really do it all. But think about, put us all together. Small businesses are, any one small business is not going to kind of command change or, rectifying some sort of an issue, but really together, collectively, it's really a force. And it's a force that I think rivals any of the big multinational companies that are out there in terms of, they have a big audience. We ought to have a big audience too. But it requires us to kind of engage together. So yeah, I do like the diverting negativity into activism,
problem solving.
Yeah, problems. Yeah. Yes, problem solving. That's a better way of putting it. The idea that there's we're not helpless here. We can, and it doesn't have to be a brawl. Usually brawls don't solve anything. So let's just go win instead.
And sometimes winning means bringing the right person into the conversation. I agree with you. A lot of people do come with, they want to talk about their business. They also want to vet and share frustrations. So I think tactically, it's nice to bring in a third party. Hey, John, why don't you join this conversation? Let me introduce you to Linda. Linda does X, and it's always nice to say something nice about her, or to help position this as a friendly conversation. And then, I don't know if you've done this before, but I do it all the time. When I connect to people at an event, I'll say something like, I think you guys should continue having a conversation. I'm going to let you guys get to know each other, get acquainted. Linda, this is John, and I'll say something about him. And then I'll tap Linda's elbow and say, I'll talk to you guys soon. And I'm out. And I found that that's been very helpful to sort of navigate these 300, 400, 500, 1,000 people conferences, letting people get their frustration, letting them vet, letting them share what they do. And then once I understand, oh, this person can benefit, they can both benefit from listening to and knowing each other. Have you encountered any of that in your space over the years?
Yeah. There's rarely a circumstance where, at least people in our, they're all business owners, right? That's who we engage with, people that own businesses, where there's not some benefit from them being connected to another person who owns a business. And we started to really I don't want to say we discovered it on accident, but it wasn't like a major part of what we did, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger part, the more popular aspect of what we do are peer engagements. And so putting two peers together is like it's a strategy that makes sense in almost any circumstance.
That's why they're there. They're there to sell more things, right?
And it's funny how people can be still very shy. So they're a business owner. They've obviously, they're risk takers. They're out there building something most of the time from scratch, and yet go to one of these places and they're really pretty shy. So the idea of making an introduction is something that is valued. Like that's extra value to them, even though there might be, it's like, well, I've got a lot of people I've got to talk to. Maybe put these two together so I can go talk to some other folks and
Correct.
Make sure that that I'm touching more people across the landscape. But that peer-to-peer interaction has become so powerful now. I've found that business owners, especially with the isolation that happened in 2020 and 2021, where you're still running a business or trying to run a business, and now you're an island. Like you're cut off from a lot of the places where you might have support, and just the idea of having that cohort of people that at least somewhat understand the types of pressures and challenges that you're facing. It's powerful stuff. And so we started with the peer groups where it's like, you can't be employees of the business to get into our networking events. You have to own the business, like own the owners. And so we started there. And then the programming, we always had our mindset, we got to get a big name in for programming. But what we found out over time was that peer-led learning sessions rated higher than when we brought in the big famous names. So when we would have a panel of dynamic, talented business owners that were just talking through a challenge that they have in common and the approach that they took, those ended up being the most popular things. And so there's magic that happens that when entrepreneurs are just spending time together, and that connection has so much power that it is like it's always the right answer to put them together.
Yeah, I have found to your point that this value of connecting people is probably the highest level of service we can provide to others, especially pre-qualifying and knowing that they can both benefit from an introduction, whether it's in person or email. Have you found any other ideas in terms of our value proposition that we offer people? So we talked about maybe information, knowing a little bit about their industry or some trends. We'd certainly talk about connections. What are some of the other ways we can make relational deposits in people that we want to build long-term relationships with?
Yeah, I mean, there are endless opportunities, but I think the ones, think of, just to be blunt about it, the ones that have potential, to zero in on the ones that have a potential to turn into mutually beneficial financial relationships. It's when the people say to the governmental space, what do small businesses need? More customers. Like at the end of the day, having an environment where they have growth opportunities, and so that's where I think it really kind of hit it out of the park, is when it can't be forced and people got to earn their own way, but the idea of connecting people where there's a shot that they could end up really doing business together in a way where they win. Those are, that's in the end, it's what you need to be in business and to survive, is to have sales. I say that either you're part of the sales structure, or you support somebody who's doing sales, or you're not necessary, right? Because without that,
without customers, we have nothing.
You have nothing, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that I think that's if there's a bias in the system, is that yes, there's a lot of benefit to knowing more people, but those relationships that can turn into like a trajectory for the business, there's just a big premium on, and that's where I think there's a lot of value. But it's also it is problem solving too. Sometimes there's just an issue, a challenge that's in front of us, and what are you doing to, as a supply chain, for example? Let me give you one of my favorite examples. I heard a restaurateur that was really, really frustrated that the most popular thing on their menu, so it's chicken wings, they couldn't get. And when they could get them, with all the supply chain issues, they were so prohibitively expensive that it priced out of the market that they were serving. And so like there's this staple that they couldn't consistently deliver on. And so it was frustrating. And to say to people, sorry, and now you're saying, sorry, I can't give you what you want. And so being very entrepreneurial and understanding that, sorry, I can't give you what you want, saying that to your customers is just not a viable long-term option. Instead, it was a matter of what can I get and how can I make that a cool new experience and have that not just be the apology, but to be the hook. Come here to see what exciting new thing that you haven't seen or that we hadn't done before, that is not going to be the same old thing. And it was a different type of an approach. Like now it's like you're going to come back to see what's new on the menu. Now to the person who's running it, it's like, I don't have a choice about new things on the menu because I can't always consistently get anything these days. And so it's taken that type of an approach and to see when that like approach is shared and others, wheels turning and people think, oh, so I can't get this. And what if I were to really change it up? And the fact that I couldn't get this ends up being a part of my brand in a positive way, that we're doing new, fresh things and exciting to come and see what's new. And the problem solving, we're all facing this type of a challenge. What are you doing? What do you do? Like that, those kinds of discussions are of high value to people that otherwise don't have many contemporaries in their life that know what it's like to be responsible to run a business, to be responsible for all these other people's families and their income, but also to their other stakeholders, their community and their customers to be able to deliver, to just talk through the ways that people are addressing those challenges and problems can be of high value. So I think those are the two kind of premium areas when you're making connections. If I can put people together where I think in the future this might turn into a real business relationship that provides value on both sides of the equation, and others where it's like these people have a common problem. They're all struggling through trying to figure it out themselves. Put them together and see what they can come up with.
I love that. Let's transition now to just general advice you have for the up and coming small business owner, entrepreneur. These days, a lot of solopreneurs throughout the country and people that, maybe they're challenged with developing relationships. They don't know where to start, or they got to do a lot of cold calling, and that's a big part of their business and how they drive revenue. What type of advice do you have for them? Get the advantage of the position you're in today, plus your time in office. You've seen a lot, you've met a lot, you know what works, what doesn't work. What's the best piece of advice you have for building relationships long term?
You really have to be prepared to go all in. I mean, if you're used to kind of living where everything's comfortable and you know what the outcome is going to be, and it's important to you that you know what the outcome is going to be before you kind of get into it, you're going to struggle. Like the ability to kind of go into a scenario where there's some risk, and especially risk of rejection. Here's the thing, though, is like there's not rejection doesn't really cost you anything in a literal sense. And you can learn something from rejection. But ultimately, when you're like, if you let the fear of that stop you from trying, then you'll never get anywhere. So that's like just being willing, kind of steeling your nerves to say, I'm just going to go into this room and I'm going to meet people. And maybe you're not good at meeting people. But like anything else, the more you practice, like you'll figure it out. We've talked about different tactics and things, but people figure it out when they're committed to it.
Mm-hmm.
They figure out what works for them, where they've had success and where they haven't had success. And it's good if you've got some advice, but if you don't try and you're not willing, because even with the best advice in the world, you're still going to get rejection. And I've made I've made a lot of cold calls in my day. When I was in banking and commercial lending, tons and tons of cold calls, just trying to get in the door with somebody. And here's what I found was that, changing banks is a pain. And most people are not going to want to go through the process. But if you reach out to enough people, you're going to, at some point, you're going to get the right person on the right day.
Yeah. I was waiting for your call.
Yes.
Thanks for calling, Brian.
Yeah. Like either I've got this new thing and you know what? I haven't kept my bank honest in a while, or my bank really ticked me off and I'm just ready to look at options right now.
Yeah.
Like the thing is, like, you can't, a lot of times the rejection has nothing to do with you. It just has to do with the other person's timing. Exactly. And so it just wasn't right. And you just got to be able to accept that and not let it stop you from making the next call. And especially when I was running for governor and meeting a lot of new people, and the money calls, like trying to raise money, for me, it's really easy to raise money for causes I believe in or for other people that I believe in. It's really hard for me to ask for me. And yet I was a relatively successful fundraiser because I just had the gumption to ask.
You were all in.
Yeah, it was, exactly. It was all in. And even there, it's like, okay, I've got 50 names here and I know that 40 of them are going to say no.
But you got a call.
But I don't know which 40.
Yeah, right.
I'd love to be able to know which 40 ahead of time are going to say no and which 10 are going to say yes. To the 10, I got to call all 50. And that's unless you're all in, you're not going to get there. People who start businesses often do have, though, that type of all-in type of a philosophy or mentality for their business, because it's a huge risk to take. More businesses fail than succeed. So the idea that you're at a point where you're going to take a risk that big, you got what it takes. Just plan and execution, and not letting the rejection or the days where stuff doesn't come together stop you from making the next day a success. And consistency, so where we started this conversation, consistency pays off over time.
Well, I appreciate all the insight and information, and I hope you guys have enjoyed a little bit of a perspective from Brian Calley, dear friend of mine, former lieutenant governor of the state of Michigan, current president and CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan, the chief advocate in the state on behalf of small businesses. A great conversation. I'd love to do it again sometime. We could talk shop for hours, but I'd like to end it right here and just say thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you.